William of Normandy died face down in the mud of Senlac Hill, and the kingdom he came to conquer went on without him. It is one of the great hinges of history that never turned the way we remember, a battle that in our world ended with an arrow, a usurper crowned at Westminster, and 1,000 years of English life rebuilt in a foreign tongue. But on October 14th, 1066, the line held. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. To understand the stakes, return to the cold beginning of that year. Edward the Confessor died on January 5, 1066, leaving no son and no settled heir. The next day, the witan, the council of nobles and churchmen that made and counselled English kings, elected Harold Godwinson and crowned him. Harold was the most powerful earl in England, son of Godwin of Wessex, and he carried no drop of royal blood, only the trust of the men who chose him. Almost at once the claims arrived. William, Duke of Normandy, insisted Edward had promised him the crown, and that Harold himself had sworn a holy oath to uphold it. Far to the north, Harald Hardrada of Norway sharpened a claim of his own. One throne, 3 kings, and 9 months in which Harold had to defend a kingdom that had only just changed hands. But what waited for him in the south, what would be decided in a single afternoon near Hastings, would echo for 1,000 years. The first blow fell in the north. In September 1066, Harald Hardrada's fleet crossed the North Sea, joined by Harold's own exiled brother Tostig, and the Norwegians swept toward York. Harold answered with a feat that still astonishes. He gathered his housecarls and the fyrd and marched them the length of England. And on September 25, he fell upon the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge before they knew he was near. The fighting was savage and total. By its end, Harald Hardrada lay dead, Tostig with him, and the great Norwegian bid for England was broken so thoroughly that the survivors needed only a fraction of the ships they had come in to carry them home. It was a victory worthy of legend, but victory has a cost measured in flesh, and Harold's army was bled and exhausted by the effort. Even as the dead were counted on the trampled grass, word came galloping from the south. The Normans had landed. William's fleet had reached Pevensey on September 28, while Harold was still bloodied in the north. Now Harold turned his weary men around and drove them roughly 250 miles south in under 2 weeks, gathering strength as he came. On October 14th, he took the high ground at Senlac, near Hastings, and there the English did what the English did best. They locked their shields into a wall along the ridge and dared the Normans to break it. William's army was the more varied archers below, infantry in the center, and the mounted knights that were the terror of the age. Wave after wave climbed the slope, and wave after wave the shield wall threw them back. Then came the gambit that in our history won the day. The Norman cavalry broke and fled, feigning rout, hoping to lure the English off their ridge and into the open. Here the timeline turns. The shield wall did not chase. Discipline held where once it shattered, and when the English saw the Norman horse milling in confusion below, it was Harold's men who surged downward in a single hammering countercharge. They found William in the press and cut him down. The word spread faster than any order could contain it. The Duke is dead, and a leaderless host has no reason to die on a foreign hill. The Normans broke and ran for their ships. The conquest was over before it had a name. Harold rode back to a kingdom that was still his own. There was no harrying of the shires, no ring of castles, no foreign lords parceling out English land. There was simply a king who had won twice in a single autumn. He rewarded the northern earls, Edwin and Morcar, whose loyalty the crown had leaned on through the crisis, and he ruled as English kings had ruled before him through the shire courts, the hundred system, the geld tax gathered in coin, and the council of the witan. This is the quiet truth that the real conquest erased. England in 1066 was already a wealthy, literate, governed kingdom, its business done in Old English, its law grown from custom. Harold did not need to build a new state. He needed only to keep the one he had. And so he did. Without a Norman king, England's gaze never swung toward France. The marriages, the wars, the trade routes, all stayed bound to the world Harold knew, the world of Denmark, Norway, and the Baltic shore. The North Sea remained an English highway rather than a frontier. But that orientation carried an old danger. Svein Estridsson, King of Denmark, held a claim by descent from Knut, who had ruled England within living memory. A Scandinavian England was a richer England and a more exposed one. The threat from across the water never fully slept. That tension would shape the reigns to come. Across the shires, no motte-and-bailey castles rose. The stone keep, that engine of foreign domination by which a few hundred knights held down a nation, was never planted in English soil. Lordship rested instead where it always had on the burh, on the Great Hall, on obligations of service owed upward to the crown through the fyrd and the sworn oath. Power in this England was a web of duty, not a fist of private stone. A lord answered to a king and a court, not merely to the walls he could build. It made for a different kind of country, less fortified against its own people, more bound together by law and custom than by conquest. And then there is the matter of words. Old English continued as the language of law, of charter, of rule. It went on absorbing Norse, as it always had, for the two were close cousins of the same North Sea family, near enough that a Dane and an Englishman could half understand each other. But the great flood never came. There was no torrent of Norman French pouring into the courts and kitchens and counting houses, no slow fracture between the Latin-touched speech of the powerful and the plain words of the ruled. The tongue of the king and the tongue of the commoner did not split apart. The English we might have spoken in this world would be stranger to our ears, and yet, in its bones, more holy itself. None of this was destined. That is the hardest and most important thing to hold on to. A single charge that did not come. A single line that did not break. History balanced on it, and in our world it tipped the other way. Here, kingship stayed elective in form, the crown bound to the council of the witan rather than seized by right of conquest. Law grew upward from custom and the judgment of the shire, not downward from imported feudal tenure. England matured as what it had been becoming all along, a Germanic and Scandinavian-facing realm, neither paradise nor ruin, simply a country following its own grain. The conquest, we remember, was not the only road. It was one possibility among many, made to look inevitable only because it happened. On a hill near Hastings, in the failing light of an October afternoon, another England was just as real, and very nearly was.